For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services. Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. I want to talk to you about the video game Biomutant, which I played about the first 5 hours of recently on the PlayStation, for the PlayStation 4, using backwards compatibility on the PlayStation 5. And I want to thank THQ Nordic for very graciously supplying me with a review copy to take a look at this one. Really interesting. This game has been anticipated for a while, and people have been very curious about what this animal, no pun intended, is going to be. I'm coming to this and providing my thoughts a little bit late. I was out of town last week celebrating my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and so I don't know that there's a ton that I could say that you couldn't find better said elsewhere. So I decided that I am going to give my thoughts on what I think of the basic gameplay, my usual types of review thoughts, but in part because of how much the game lends itself to it, I'm going to spend likely the bulk of my time talking about some of the themes of this game. And I'll put timestamps in the video version below so that you can jump to the part that interests you the most. But anyway, this is a post-apocalyptic, a post-post-apocalyptic, vegetation has grown back, open world, anthropomorphic, animal action RPG. And it has, in the overall structure, it seems to have that sort of Ubisoft base conquering template that it's structured on, where there are different regions in the open world that you are going to and conquering and kind of adding them to your resources. And as you're taking over the different parts of this open world, you're becoming more powerful and eventually able to take on the big bad or do the big deed that happens at the end sometime long after the 5 hours that I've spent with it. The visuals really looked striking to me at first, mainly for the colors and the contrast. It really was an interesting world to look at, to move around in. But I noticed maybe about an hour and a half to 2 hours in that the textures began to show their weakness. So they're not as detailed, certainly when you get close up to them, and they can look a little bit repetitive and kind of patterned. And they were giving off what I would describe as, I guess a AA flavor. And THQ Nordic is kind of, as a publisher, in that space largely, where they're putting out these AA games. And it's great because you can get some experiences from a publisher like them. I say like them, they're actually the only AA publisher that's coming to mind right now, that you just aren't going to get from the really big guys or from the indie brands. And so I do appreciate what they put out, the kind of spot in the market that they're filling. But their games are certainly hit or miss with me. I would suggest, if you give this game a try, reducing the sharpness in the settings completely and letting the colors and the lighting do the heavy lifting, because the jaggy lines and the kind of rough textures really stood out to me more the sharper I had that setting in the visual options. The tone of the story, the world, the whole experience is a blend of serious, philosophical, but then also like childlike fantasy. I think it's the anthropomorphic animals that have a real Disney vibe to it. But it's not just that they're anthropomorphic animals. The Rocket in Guardians of the Galaxy is an anthropomorphic animal, but he's got like this, even though he's a humorous character, has this edge to him, this hard edge to him, and that, I was wondering, is that going to be the case? Are they going to kind of play against type? And they don't do that very much. There's a British storybook narrator that's reading basically all of the dialogue and kind of telling the story for you, and so it has this very living room by the fireplace kind of vibe in the audio aspect of the storytelling. And then when you do hear the characters themselves, you're just hearing them a little bit as they do their cutesy animal gibberish that the British narrator is then translating. And I eventually, thanks to the options in the settings, turned off both of those, both the gibberish and the British narrator. I was over it after about maybe 2 hours into my time with the game. The combat is straightforward. It's not, I don't think, complicated to pull off in a control. You're directing the camera toward the enemy, and then you're pushing the buttons that activate attacks for the most part. It's not much more complicated than that. The auto lock on the enemies did give me some troubles getting it to lock on the enemies that I wanted it to. So I wasn't always in the combat situations with multiple enemies attacking the enemy that I wanted, which can be a little bit frustrating now and then because I tend to want to whittle down, the overall forces by taking down one enemy at a time. So, but I never felt endangered by it. Again, I was playing on the easiest difficulty, which is kind of my status quo. But even so, I pumped stat points into the intellect stat whenever given the chance while leveling up. And I never put it into anything defensive or anything like that, and I still felt unthreatened on the easy difficulty. So I think if you want that kind of casual experience where you don't feel like you're in danger of dying and having to repeat material, you are very likely to be able to have that with this game, based on my experience so far. Some enemies, annoyingly, do seem to regenerate their health or reset their health once you move away from them even just a moderate distance. And I found this in one other open world. Greedfall is the only other game I can think of, the open world action RPG that I can think of, that does this, where if you kind of want to get a breather and get away from your enemies, you just put some distance between you, eventually they will stop following you. They will turn around and move back to kind of their starting positions in the world, and also regen their health at the same time. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that, because that essentially forces me, rather than feeling like I'm existing in an open world, forces me to have combat in this limited area of terrain unless I want them to endlessly regenerate their health. So I do find that to be a little bit annoying, but again, not insurmountable at all, because again, on easy, I did not feel threatened at all. I could just get in there and go at it, and take out the bad guys. There are tons of combat abilities to upgrade and to unlock. There are multiple weapons, which each have their own kind of like abilities that you can unlock associated with those weapons. There are general abilities you can unlock. There are psi powers, like these psionic powers, which are kind of like magic, and mutations and stuff. There are 3 upgrade currencies, as far as I can tell. And 5 hours in, I feel like I've barely earned any of them, or earned what I want to kind of make a significant upgrade. So it looks like, despite having a lot of options in front of me, it's going to take me a while to really explore them. And they might be kind of... well, first of all, one of the reasons it seems like it's going to take me a while to get to them is because of these 3 upgrade currencies, there's one that you earn automatically, and 2 that are found in the world, 1 at least that's found in the world. I'm not sure. Sorry about that. But this one that is hard to grind for because it's only found in the world. You can find it in containers or specific types of enemies. And I don't know where those could be found. I suppose if I wander the open world, I could really grind for those kinds of things, but look for those kinds of stat upgrade points. But I would really prefer just a predictable way to be able to grind for XP, so that I can, build up my character in the way that I want. And again, it's not about challenge. I don't play games for difficulty. I play them for a power fantasy, to see the character develop and to be able to do cool new things. Especially in a third-person game, it's like digital action figures, and I want my action figures to be able to do those cool, snazzy things that the upgrade tree says that I can get access to. But if I don't know how to get the upgrade points for that, it feels a little bit like a tease, and I'm like, well, I hope sometime I'll be able to get the upgrade points that I want for that. I don't know how soon that's going to be, So, again, 5 hours is not a lot of time, but it didn't give me a good feeling in those first 5 hours, not knowing how fast or consistently I was going to be able to upgrade to get the cool things that I want to be able to get. Also, frustratingly, the psi powers specifically, the ones that are kind of like magic spells, are gated by moral choices. There is a moral system in this game that is a major part of the game, and I'll get to that in a second. And there are some upgrade abilities in the psi power tree that you can only access if you have a certain number of dark moral points or a certain number of light moral points. And I'm like, dang, that sucks, because there are some over in the light tree and some in the dark tree that I would like to have at the same time. They look really cool. I have a vision in my head of what I would like my character to be, and you're saying, no, you can only have this combination of abilities. And not only that, but you have to be making certain role play choices in the world if you want to have certain psi abilities. Now again, it only seems to be with this psi powers tree, not with the other abilities, but still I find it frustrating because I am trying to build my character as a sort of pseudo magic user, really psi power focused. And so going that route and finding, oh my gosh, I'm like totally stuck on this narrow path based on my moral choices in a totally different aspect of the gameplay is frustrating to me. Now, the morality issues and the philosophical themes going on are a major part of the game. Environmentalism, a major theme in the game. There's these light and dark sort of angel characters that show up as you make significant choices in dialogue, and whether you're making the light choice or the dark choice, and they're giving commentary. They're both kind of fighting for you to pick their side. And so there's just a lot going on in terms of light and dark, or good and evil, or whatever that they would maybe want to call it. I mean, they call it light and dark. Maybe they don't want to use objective terms like good and evil. I suspect that may be the case, that may be somewhere in the underpinnings of the writing of this game and the philosophy that it's coming from. But hold that thought and I'll come back to it. There is a crafting system that I haven't done much with as far as like armor and weapons. You can upgrade your weapons. You can slot abilities into your armor and weapons, and so there is stuff there to play with that I would probably enjoy playing with. I just haven't really gotten deep enough into the game to appreciate what they're doing with that yet. There are some light puzzle-solving elements that I'm not a fan of solving puzzles. So far, I haven't found difficulty with these. Mostly, it's just like, okay, here's these, here's the letter A on this end and the letter B on this end, and there's a bunch of knobs and dials in between, and you have to turn the knobs and the dials so that you can connect ultimately A to B in one circuit, and you only get so many turns of each of these dials, and depending on what your intellect stat is, you get more turns. And so you just have to figure out, okay, how can I connect A to B through this circuit, this circuit path, in the smallest number of moves. And if you have a low intellect stat, you're really going to have to work hard to make them connect. If you have a high intellect stat, you get a generous amount of moves. I was building a psi-based character, which depends on the intellect stat, so I had a really nice high intellect, and so the puzzles weren't a problem for me. But if you don't want to play an intellect-based build and you hate puzzles, you might find that frustrating, that that it's more punishing, a more difficult task for you when you're playing that kind of build. Let's see here. I would say, before I get onto the themes here, just kind of in general, I would say that this is possibly a game that would have more appeal to my 10-year-old son, my 13-year-old son, maybe tweens, where it's serious, so it doesn't have like a purely kiddie flavor, certainly, but also it doesn't have a hard as nails adult vibe to it. I haven't checked the rating on this. It's probably like a teen type rating would be my guess. It's not like a bloody game, that kind of thing, but they're going for a mix of seriousness and childlike, it feels like, at the same time. And so I just can't help but wonder if it would be a better fit for that bridge group in their tweens. But it's not a premise or tone that I am personally drawn to. Now, what I am drawn to in this game and any game is like worldview themes. And when games and writers are dealing with moral issues or philosophical issues or worldview issues, and through the writing are saying things that they believe are true and important about us as humans or the world that we live in, and this game seems like it's wanting to say a lot and to bring up a lot of different topics for players to think about. Let me see here. It's got a strong theme of environmentalism, and I actually think that as believers, even though typically Christians are not associated with environmentalism, I think in recent years that has been changing, and I think there's every good reason for that to change, because we as believers know that we are meant to be stewards of what God has given us. We were meant to, before the fall, rule creation in peace with creation, in harmony with the created world. But because of our sin, Creation got broken, we got broken, and it's been a struggle to get along with creation ever since. But as believers, we should be entering into that already but not yet mentality of Christ's kingdom coming into the world. And so I think we can see things like recycling and being aware of environmental concerns as part of the role that we want to step into as those who will eventually, alongside Christ, rule over the new creation and have finally a harmonious relationship with nature. And so we can enter into that as we're meant to enter into so many other things that we'll be doing in the new creation. We can enter into that now to a degree that we're able. Let's see here. We've got this futuristic world. I think that naturalism, some form of naturalistic philosophy, is the philosophy that's at the foundation of the writing of this game. I say that for a number of reasons, and I'll kind of get into those. The first one I noticed is that animals are mutated into persons. Now, this could just be a Disneyfication thing, where it's like, oh, it's cute, and that's all there is to it. We just like animals, But when you create a natural cause that can change something that is not a person into having those qualities that are intrinsic and essential to persons, and that is done entirely through naturalistic means, then I think that suggests that there is only a physical component to humans that makes them what they are. Whereas I would argue as a Christian that the non-physical components are essential elements of who we are and what makes us persons. So that's why like an AI, no matter how sophisticated, can never become a person, because we are not capable of giving it immaterial qualities that are essential and needed, required for personhood. And so likewise, no matter how much an animal gets mutated, an insect, a fox, a bunny, whatever, it will never be able to become a person unless God himself intervenes and gives it that immaterial quality that is required for personhood, for the essentials of personhood. So, but again, it could just be, oh, we're doing the cute Disneyfication thing and making animals into people, and okay, that's fine. So we can set that aside. But there's some interesting stuff just generally philosophically it makes me wonder, are they just kind of like pulling from wherever and there's no rhyme or reason to it? There's a tree of life concept in this game that's like central to the main story and what you're kind of pursuing, but it doesn't seem to be the biblical tree of life. There's talk about creatures becoming one with the tree of life, and that's a good thing. That's a positive thing, to become one with the tree of life. There's this thing called ki, which is a primal energy that flows through everything, very Eastern philosophy kind of thing. There's the slogan of staying true to your heart, which, being authentic as a person is valuable, but if we make staying true to our hearts, what does that really mean? That mean just do what your heart wants, or just always follow your heart? Well, I think Jeffrey Dahmer and Hitler followed their hearts, and that didn't take them in good places. So yeah, that whole slogan has always been really strange and frustrating to me. Let's see, there's an idea of being judged by your actions and not your intentions, and I think there's some value to that. We can turn that over in our heads and talk about that a bit. We have this phrase, sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself. There's a number of phrases in this game that sound metaphorical, and I was like, what are you really saying? There's a strand of thought that's been around for a long time that if something sounds metaphorical and mysterious, then it must be deeply profound. But in order to understand if it actually is profound and has something to say that's going to be revelatory to our human experience, we first have to put on the table and talk about what is this actually saying, not how he or she interprets it, because we could come away with different interpretations. What is it actually saying? And then we can evaluate the truth claims that it's making and whether or not they are something revelatory and useful to us in our earthly existence. More than once, there's this idea of finding yourself, and I would like to put that on the table and say, what does it mean to find yourself? Let's see. There was a reference that intentional or not, probably unintentional, to 2 Timothy 1:6, where the little light creature says when your character makes a good choice, fan that flame of goodness, in other words, and that's a reference, intentional or not, to 2 Timothy 1:6. There's some stuff going on with gender roles in society where your main character was raised by a mother who was like the leader of the tribe, and she was the teacher of this martial art, and she was very strong physically, and you had a father who was staying at home, and he was sewing, and he had more of that kind of nurturing, emotionally connective kind of personality and stuff. And so I don't know if there's what the commentary is that's going on there, if any, but I suspect that was done with some kind of a purpose. Let's see here. I am actually going to show a couple of clips from the game now before I get into some other quotes, but let me show you this clip here and then I'll make some comments on it.
The Myriad's conviction to stop the World Eaters began when the Leviathans rose from the depths of the surf. Siding with the Myriad's movement for wholeness in a fragmented world might seem like the logical thing to do, but is it the right thing? One thing's certain, though. Destiny arrives all the same.
That's really interesting, how we've got this comparison of doing what is logical versus doing what is right. And I want to ask the writer, what do you mean by right? Do you mean right like objectively moral, like this is what ought to be done? Or do you mean right just in the sense of it pragmatic, like, we got the logical choice versus the pragmatic choice? As Christians, biblically speaking, we are encouraged to be very reasonable and to think logically, because that will lead us to what is true and what is right, what is objectively, morally correct, And I wish I understood just a little bit more about what they meant by comparing and contrasting what is logical and what is right.
Myriad wants unity between the tribes. Their goal is understanding of the greater good and establishing a code of honor. Says there has to be some dark so that light can prove its purity above it, and promises this will happen if you help them unite the tribes, defeat the World Eaters, and save the Tree of Life. He had a feeling you'd say that, and it's too bad. He wished you'd follow your heart instead of your mind. A light heart lives long. He thinks you should reconsider and follow your heart instead of your mind. Otherwise, he'll have no choice but to treat you as a rival. He offers you to return and take your place at his side when you've found out you've picked the wrong one. And with that, he urges you to seek protection at Jagni's Stick Fort as soon as you can. He won't be able to guarantee your safety now. He says that not taking a side in the tribe war is the same as taking the other side. If you're not with them, you're against them. Goodbyes are not forever. They're not the end. He assures you that he is going to be the be-all and end-all before this is over.
Now that's an interesting idea, the idea that there must be some darkness so that purity can kind of prove the purity of light can kind of prove itself. And I don't know, I could go back and forth talking about, depending on the application of that, if there must be some darkness. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but I do think that there are some aspects of God's goodness and his character that we would never have been able to know if he hadn't allowed sin to enter into the world and provide some contrast and some context to better understand his nature. And so I think there's something to that I think that we can find agreement with as Christians. Of course, this business about follow your heart and not your mind, I've already made a comment on that. That's just a horrific way to live life. And then he says, if you're not with us, then you're against us. And it depends on the context, depends on who's saying that. That's the interesting, very potentially polarizing kind of idea. But this guy, saying he's going to be the be-all, end-all, I want to know what he means by that, too. I mean, is he saying that he's going to be God, and that this guy, that basically, you ought to be on my side because I'm going to be God in the end? I don't know. I mean, there's a number of things in this game that I'm like, what do you mean by that? Because that's very evocative of something like very philosophical or very striking or very worldview oriented that I wish I could get to the bottom of. But anyway, let me talk through just some quotes here. I eventually did. I'm not going to play these scenes just because for time constraints, and also because I turned off the dialogue at one point during my playthrough, so I don't have footage that would, you'd hear the dialogue anyway. So I'll just kind of read these quotes to you. And in particular, let me start with, just some brief ones about death. There's a scene in which it is said, "Death is not to be feared by one who has lived life with a pure heart. A part of them will live on in you." And I've made a number of videos when different celebrities have died, asking the question, well, where is this celebrity now? How ought we, as believers specifically, talk about a celebrity who has passed? There's a lot of phrases like this that can be easily come out of our mouths without us thinking about it. Or we can hear other people say these kinds of things. Here's another quote. "What you do for yourself dies with you. What you do for your kin remains and makes you immortal in their memory." And so we talk about people living on in our memories, and a part of them living on in us. And first of all, I mean, I guess it sounds kind of pretty if you don't really think about it, but do you really want to live on in someone's memories? Well, what happens when they die? If they didn't tell anybody about you, well, then nobody remembers you, and then you live on in nobody, and then you finally do really for surely die or something. I don't... So it's like, I think these are meant to be comforting things that are said, but the more you think about them, the more we can see how empty they are to provide any kind of comfort. If that is our hope for immortality, living on in the memories of someone else, because it's not going to take long for us to be forgotten. And then also it says, "Death is not to be feared by one who has lived life with a pure heart." And so they are, I don't know what that means, a pure heart. Pure in what sense? You could be purely evil. Something could be purely crap. If you take everything else, all the diamonds out of it, then it's just pure crap. So, I mean, but I assume what they mean is something that is good, that is purely good. But then we have to ask, okay, well, what are you saying that objective virtues exist? That there are objective moral values that we ought to be pursuing, and that would be an interesting thing for the writing of this game to affirm, because of how it treats morality in so many other parts of the game. And that's where I'm going to spend a good the rest of my time here. There is a leaning toward, I guess, what I would call selfish morality compared to objective morality. Let me read you some quotes here. There's one about environmentalism that says, "You owe it to yourself to protect the environment." And so, in other words, it will serve you well to protect the environment. But as Christians, our motive should not be for ourselves, but out of a desire to first and foremost honor God, and then love and help other people. And so those are the reasons that we ought to respect our environment and do what we can in the proper priorities of other things that we're meant to do in this life, to take good care of our environment, and so if you only have yourself as the motivation, then these arguments have no power for someone who just doesn't feel like it's going to benefit them to protect the environment. It's like, well, I am going to do drugs and pleasure myself for the next 6 weeks. I'm in this immense depression, and I'm only going to live for 6 weeks more. Well, then the selfish moral argument has no power there. There is, it's completely lost any of its substance. or if you don't take that kind of extreme example, for whatever reason, if a person doesn't find pleasure and fulfillment in taking care of the environment, then this argument has no power. Being considerate will help you feel at peace with yourself. So in other words, that's the motive they provide for being considerate toward others, is that it will help you feel at peace with yourself. Well, should we be seeking peace with ourselves? There's even among Christians, I'll hear this phrase, forgiving yourself, which is very similar to being at peace with yourself. But really, as believers, what we ought to believe is that it's not key that we have peace with ourselves, but that we realize that we have peace with God, who made us, who has a more accurate perspective on reality than we do. And so us having peace with ourselves is not that big of a deal compared to having peace with God, who has the accurate understanding of the universe and what's valuable and what's important and what's right and wrong and how the scales of justice are being balanced. Making sure that we're on the right page with Him is far more important. This one I'll just briefly mention. The ultimate test of conscience is the willingness to give up anything to save what you truly care about. Now, I want to say that these arguments do have limited ability, and and in a mixed environment, when we're talking maybe about political policy, like government policy, if we're trying to appeal to a wide group of people, then maybe you can try to appeal to someone's sense of, selfishness and what's going to be good for them. So it's not that these kinds of arguments are never going to have usefulness, but they certainly do leave God out of the picture, and I think are much weaker for doing that. But it says the ultimate test of conscience is the willingness to give up anything to save what you truly care about. You know what? The willingness to give up anything to save what you truly care about, that's good. That's a good thing. But it's interesting to say the ultimate test of conscience, as if our conscience and not violating our conscience is the most important thing. That is the kind of barometer for moral success or failure, is whether or not we pass the test of our own conscience. Do the right thing for the sake of your conscience, is another quote here. It's only through your inner conflict you are held accountable for your actions. So on this view, we are only subject to ourselves. We are only accountable to ourselves. And so it's that inner conflict that holds us accountable for our actions. There is nothing outside. It says it's only through your inner conflict you're held accountable for your actions. There is no outside word given to us, no outside communication from a being that we are responsible to. And of course, as Christians, we would say, no, it's not only through our inner conflict. That can be useful, inner conflict, but it's not only through our inner conflict that we're held accountable for our actions. We're held accountable by what God has revealed to be right and wrong, and what is our purpose and our identity. And so anyway, all these things are just pointing to what I think is the naturalistic underpinnings here. At one point, I chose in dialogue to say about a certain situation, I want revenge. And the answer that the character gave me, the narrator actually, in describing the gibberish that the character was saying to my character, is, he understands why you seek revenge, but he doesn't think you realize how that'll make you feel once you claimed it. So again, the best thing that he's got is, revenge isn't going to make you feel good. Revenge is going to make you feel bad. It's not that revenge is bad. It's not that revenge is wrong. It's that it's going to make you feel something unpleasurable. That's the best argument that they got here. And those are the best arguments that can be given on naturalism. There are ones based on how you feel, because there is no objective morality on naturalism. The most you can argue is how it's going to make you feel. You can't even argue on the basis of what's going to help society if you don't care one whit about society. You have to care about society in order for what's good for society to motivate you, So it ultimately has to come back to you and what you want, what feels good, right? It is interesting that the little light angel pops up after this dialogue and says, first instincts can be truly awful. So that is giving a qualitative statement about first instincts. I think even maybe an objectively moral statement, maybe inadvertently just kind of flowed out of the writer's fingers as they were typing this. But that does seem to be a value statement about first instincts, and one that I would agree with, that our first instincts can be truly awful. They can be have a truly negative quality to them. And then the little dark angel, the dark demon or whatever, pops up and says, the fun thing is always the right thing. I was like, hey, okay, so we are seeing that that this broken clock is right at least twice a day. It's yes, the fun thing is saying the fun thing is always the right thing is certainly something that we ought to associate with evil, with darkness. That almost seems to be a recognition of the problem with following your heart. The fun thing is always the right thing. So that's, again, I want to sit down with the writer and I say, well, what is it? How would you differentiate following your heart from this attitude of the fun thing is always the right thing? So yeah, there's just a lot to put on the table. I mean, I don't think it's that simplistic in the writer's mind. I'm not, I don't mean to disparage the writer and what I'm talking about here. I'm just trying to identify that the writer does seem to be coming from some form of naturalistic worldview, and I think this is why. But I would love to hear about more of the nuance that was going on maybe in the writer's mind as they were putting the script together. And then finally, the little light angel, in response to the dark demon thing, saying the fun thing is always the right thing, says, next time, look at it with a clear heart. Like, we didn't want to say mind there, a clear mind, clear heart. That's interesting. I don't know. So anyway, this is, in summary, not the game for me, but still, I think, enjoyable in several ways, and likely a fit for those who like the tone, who like the setting. And there is tons to sort through thoughtfully in terms of the themes and worldview being presented in the game. So, but those are all of my thoughts for now. I'd love to get yours in the comments below, and then I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. The Christian Geek Central podcast is the longest-running podcast for Christian geeks with over 600 weekly episodes and counting, featuring audio versions of much of the same content you'll find here, plus exclusive content including weekly news updates from the creators of Christian comics, novels, and video games, debriefing and commentary about what I've been playing, reading, and watching, and my expanded responses to your comments and questions via YouTube, email, or the Christian Geek Central forums. And now, with timestamps, so you can jump straight to the segments you want to hear most. Get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services, and enjoy one more way you can geek out and seek the truth.